10 years of marriage. 10 years of memories layered together like the bricks of the home we built. When I think about it now, I realize how much weight I gave to the foundation. I thought it was solid, indestructible. But even the strongest structure can crumble when cracks form in the places you least expect. Karen and I weren't just a couple, we were a team. We met in college. She was the bright, bubbly one with a laugh that could light up the room, and I was the guy lucky enough to sit beside her in an intro class. By the end of the semester, I knew she was the one. We built a life that felt more like a fairy tale than reality. A charming house on a tree-lined street, 2 golden retrievers named Max and Molly, weekend barbecues with friends, and vacations to places that now seem like distant dreams. It wasn't just what we had that made our marriage feel invincible, it was how we were together. We had routines that made the mundane magical. Lazy Sunday mornings spent reading the paper in bed. Date nights where we'd argue over whether to try a new restaurant or stick to our favorite Italian spot. Even the way she hummed while making coffee was a melody that defined my mornings. But life is cruel in the way it hides its warnings. The day things began to change felt like any other rainy Monday in November. Work had dragged on longer than usual, and I'd slogged through puddles after forgetting my umbrella at the office. Normally, Karen would greet me at the door with a teasing smile, a towel, and a kiss. But when I opened the door that evening, there was no welcome home, or warmth. The house was eerily quiet, the kitchen dark, and the familiar smell of dinner was missing. Karen was on the couch, her legs curled up underneath her. She wasn't watching TV or reading. Her attention was glued to her phone, the glow reflecting off her face. She didn't look up as I dropped my bag and shrugged off my soaked coat. "Hey," I called out, shaking water droplets from my hair. "Hey," she replied, barely glancing in my direction. "You okay?" I asked, lingering by the doorway. "Yeah. Just tired," she mumbled, her tone detached. I wanted to press her, ask why she seemed so distant, but I didn't. Maybe it was my own exhaustion or the fear of hearing an answer I wouldn't like. Instead, I let it slide. Everyone has off days, I told myself. It was probably just work stress or one of those moods we all get into. But the mood didn't pass. Over the next few weeks, Karen became different. She wasn't the same woman who used to joke about my bad cooking or beg me to rewatch cheesy rom-coms with her. She seemed preoccupied, distracted even when we were in the same room. And then there were the late meetings at work and the business trips that came out of nowhere. Karen rarely traveled for work before, but suddenly she had overnight stays almost every week. At first, I tried to dismiss the creeping unease in my gut. It was probably nothing, I told myself. Work had just gotten busier. But the little things began to pile up. She was glued to her phone constantly, and it was always turned screen side down when she set it on the counter. She started dressing differently too. Not drastically, but enough that I noticed. Sleek dresses and heels for what she claimed were casual meetings. Still, I didn't want to believe it. I was probably being paranoid, right? We'd been together for so long, how could I even consider the possibility that she'd betray me? Then came the night that changed everything. It was past midnight, and I woke up to find her side of the bed empty. For a second, I thought she might be in the bathroom, but there was no light coming from under the door. I called her name softly, but there was no response. Something about the silence felt wrong. I got up, slipping on my slippers, and walked through the house. The faint glow of her phone came from the kitchen. I stopped in the hallway, my breath catching. There she was, standing by the counter with her back to me, her shoulders hunched. She was whispering into the phone, her voice low and intimate. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. It wasn't just what she was saying, it was how she was saying it. I knew that tone. It was the same soft, tender voice she used to use with me in the early days of our relationship. My chest tightened and my hands balled into fists. I wanted to march into the kitchen, snatch the phone out of her hands, and demand to know who she was talking to. But I didn't. I stayed frozen in the hallway, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure she'd hear it. Eventually, she hung up and headed back to bed. I stood there in the dark for what felt like hours, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it grew faster than I could control. The next day, Karen was back to her usual self, or at least the version of herself she wanted me to see. She kissed me goodbye in the morning, her smile bright and cheerful, as if nothing had happened. But now, I couldn't unsee the signs. The constant phone notifications she brushed off as work, the extra effort she put into her appearance before leaving the house, the way she avoided my gaze when I asked about her trips. I started noticing more. The way she clung to her purse even at home, never leaving her phone unattended for more than a second. The laughter I'd catch from the next room when she thought I couldn't hear her. I even noticed she'd started wearing a new perfume, one I didn't recognize but that lingered in the air long after she left for her so-called meetings. But I wasn't ready to confront her, not yet. Anger wouldn't get me the answers I needed, and if I accused her without proof, she'd find a way to twist it around on me. No, I needed to be smarter. I needed the truth, and I needed to make sure that when it came out, Karen wouldn't just feel exposed. She'd feel the weight of her betrayal crushing down on her. The perfect world she thought she'd built was about to come crashing down. And I'd be the one holding the hammer. The morning after I saw her whispering into the phone, I couldn't look at her the same. It was like I was watching a stranger play the role of my wife. Karen hummed as she made breakfast, flipping pancakes and pouring coffee like it was any other day. But I couldn't shake the image of her in the kitchen the night before, speaking in that soft, secretive tone. "Did you sleep okay?" she asked, setting a mug in front of me. "Yeah," I lied, forcing a smile. "You?" "Like a rock." Her answer was too casual, too rehearsed. Her face was a mask, but I could see the cracks if I looked hard enough. The faint tension in her jaw, the way her hands fidgeted when she wasn't holding something. She was hiding something, and I was determined to find out what. That day at work I couldn't focus. My mind replayed everything, the late meetings, the sudden trips, the laughter I'd overheard. Every moment felt like a puzzle piece falling into place, forming a picture I didn't want to see. By the time I got home, I'd made a decision. I was going to investigate. I started small, searching for clues that might confirm my suspicions. Karen had always been meticulous about her phone, password protected and glued to her side, but her laptop was another story. It sat on the desk in our shared office, a space we barely used anymore. One evening, while Karen was in the shower, I opened her laptop. My hands shook as I typed in the password. It felt wrong, like crossing an invisible line. But when I saw the screen unlock, guilt was the last thing on my mind. Her emails were normal, work, newsletters, the occasional exchange with her friends. But then I checked her browsing history. My heart dropped. Hotel bookings. Several of them, all in the past 3 months, all for boutique places she'd never mentioned to me. The dates lined up with her business trips. My chest tightened as I clicked through the links, each one another nail in the coffin of my trust. I closed the laptop just as I heard the water stop running. My pulse raced as I slipped out of the office, heading back to the kitchen to pour a drink. Karen walked in moments later, her hair wrapped in a towel. "Wine already?" she teased, eyeing the glass in my hand. "Long day," I said, forcing a chuckle. She leaned over, kissing my cheek, and for the first time it felt hollow. I couldn't stop wondering whose lips she'd kissed on those trips. Over the next few weeks, I became a detective in my own marriage. It wasn't just the hotel bookings. I started watching everything Karen did. Every smile, every text, every excuse she made for being late. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to check her purse for clues. I found nothing. No receipts, no notes, nothing concrete. But the absence of evidence was evidence itself. Karen had always been a little scatterbrained, leaving receipts from Target and the grocery store in her bag for weeks. Now it was spotless, like she was erasing every trace of her life outside our home. One night, she mentioned another trip for work. "Just one night," she said over dinner, avoiding my eyes. "I'll be back by noon tomorrow." "Where this time?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. "Same place as last month," she replied, smiling too brightly. "They want me to follow up with a client." I nodded, biting back the questions swirling in my mind. The day of her trip, I decided to test her story. After she left, I called the office where Karen worked. The receptionist answered, her voice chipper. "Hi, this is Steve from IT, I lied, doing my best to sound professional. "I'm trying to confirm some travel details for Karen Thompson. Do you have her itinerary handy?" "Oh," the receptionist said, her tone confused. "Karen's not traveling this week. She's working remotely from home for a project." The blood drained from my face. I hung up without another word, staring at the phone in my hand like it had betrayed me. She hadn't just lied, she'd woven an entire web of deceit, thinking I'd never notice. When Karen came home the next day, she was glowing. Her hair was styled, her makeup flawless. She looked happier than I'd seen her in weeks, and it made me sick. "How was the trip?" I asked, my voice steady despite the anger boiling inside me. "Productive," she said, setting her bag down. The client was thrilled with the presentation. I nodded, my expression neutral, but inside I was screaming. That night, I waited until she was asleep before going through her phone. She had changed the password, but I wasn't surprised. It only confirmed what I already knew. Karen had something to hide. The next morning I couldn't keep it in anymore. Over breakfast I decided to push her just a little. "You've been traveling a lot lately," I said casually, buttering my toast. Yeah, she replied, not looking up from her plate. Funny though, I called your office the other day. They said you weren't scheduled to travel. The fork froze halfway to her mouth. Her eyes darted up to meet mine, wide with panic, before she quickly composed herself. Oh, that, she said, laughing nervously. There was a mix-up with the schedule. I talked to the receptionist about it. Did you? I asked, holding her gaze. She nodded, too quickly, her smile too tight. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. Karen was a lot of things, but she wasn't a good liar. That makes sense, I said, letting it go for now. But inside I was seething. She thought she could lie to my face and get away with it. That's when I realized this wasn't just about finding out the truth. I wanted more than answers. I wanted justice. Karen didn't know it yet, but the game had just begun. The day Karen lied to my face about her trip, something inside me shifted. The betrayal was no longer just a shadow in the corner of my mind, it was a storm I couldn't ignore. I knew the time had come to dig deeper, to peel back the layers of her deception until there was nothing left but the cold, undeniable truth. That night, while Karen slept soundly beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. My mind raced with possibilities. Who was she meeting? How long had this been going on? My stomach churned at the thought, but I couldn't stop myself from picturing the worst. By the time the first hints of dawn crept through the curtains, I'd made a decision. I needed more than hotel bookings and suspicious behavior. I needed irrefutable proof. And if Karen was going to play games with my trust, I'd play a game of my own. Over the next few days I began preparing. I'd always been the kind of guy who believed in fixing problems head-on, but this situation called for subtlety. Confrontation wasn't the answer. If I tipped my hand too soon, she'd deny everything and I'd be back at square one. No, I needed her to think I was oblivious, even as I pulled the threads of her web apart one by one. The first step was her phone. She changed the password, but I wasn't entirely locked out. Karen was careless when it came to backing up her data. I knew her phone was synced to our shared cloud account, a convenience we'd set up years ago when everything in our lives felt easy and uncomplicated. Late one night, while Karen was in the shower, I logged into the account from my laptop. My hands trembled as I navigated through the folders, each click taking me closer to what I both needed and dreaded to find. At first, it seemed like nothing was there, just pictures of our dogs, old messages from her family, and screenshots of recipes. But then I stumbled across a hidden folder labeled Miscellaneous. It was the kind of nondescript name that wouldn't draw attention unless you were looking for it. I opened it and there it was, a string of messages that made my blood run cold. The texts were between Karen and someone saved as S. I didn't recognize the number, but the tone of the messages left no doubt about their nature. S. Can't stop thinking about last night. You looked amazing. Karen, stop, you're making me blush. Winking face. S. I mean it. I wish we didn't have to sneak around like this. Karen, you know why we have to. It's not easy for me either. I scrolled through the thread, my heart pounding with every word. There were dozens of messages like that, flirty, intimate, and unmistakably wrong. The most recent ones were dated the same day as her so-called business trip. S. Hotel's all set. Can't wait to see you tonight. Karen, me too. I'll leave after dinner. Should be there by 8. I slammed the laptop shut, the bile rising in my throat. The image of Karen laughing at our dinner table, lying about her trip while planning a night with this stranger, made my stomach churn. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to storm into the bedroom and wake her up, to demand answers right then and there. But I didn't. Not yet. This wasn't the end game, it was just another step in the process. I needed more. The next day, while Karen was at work, I hired a private investigator. It felt extreme, but I needed someone who could dig deeper than I could. Someone who wouldn't hesitate to follow her, take pictures, and confirm what I already suspected. Most of my clients come to me at this point, the PI said over the phone, his tone sympathetic but businesslike. Trust your instincts, they're usually right. I'll get to work right away. Hanging up, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. On one hand, I knew I was finally taking action. On the other, I couldn't shake the fear of what he might uncover. Over the next few days, I went through the motions of normalcy. I played the dutiful husband, smiling at Karen's jokes and asking about her day. She didn't seem to notice the change in me, which only confirmed how distant we'd grown. The Karen I thought I knew would have picked up on it, but this version of her was too wrapped up in her own world to care. On the evening of her next work trip, I stayed calm. I kissed her goodbye at the door, watching as she climbed into her car and drove off. Then I texted the PI. She's on the move. Waiting for the investigator's report was torture. Every minute felt like an eternity, and I found myself pacing the living room, my mind racing with possibilities. When his call finally came, I nearly dropped the phone in my haste to answer. "She checked into a hotel on the north side of town," he said, his voice matter-of-fact. "Met up with a man in the lobby around 8:15. They went upstairs together. I got pictures, timestamps, the works." I swallowed hard, my hands shaking. "Send me everything." Within minutes, my phone buzzed with an email. I opened it, my heart pounding as I scrolled through the photos. There she was, Karen, my wife, arm in arm with a man I'd never seen before. He was tall, well-dressed, with an air of confidence that made me sick to my stomach. The final photo was the one that broke me. Karen leaning into him, their faces close, their hands intertwined as they disappeared into the elevator. That night, Karen came home as if nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek and told me she was exhausted, her suitcase casually dropped by the door. "How was your trip?" I asked, my voice betraying nothing. "Fine," she said, yawning. "Long day, but it went well." I nodded, watching her with a calmness that surprised even me. She didn't suspect a thing. As she headed upstairs to shower, I sat on the couch, the investigator's report open on my phone. The proof was there, undeniable and devastating. But instead of feeling crushed, I felt something else. A cold, calculated sense of purpose. Karen thought she'd gotten away with it. She thought I was still the naive husband who trusted her without question. But she was wrong. This wasn't the end of our story. Not yet. The next move was mine. The moment I saw the photos, something in me shifted. The grief and disbelief melted away, replaced by an icy resolve. The proof wasn't just for me anymore, it was a weapon and I knew exactly how to use it. This wasn't going to be a messy shouting match or an impulsive confrontation. No, Karen had made this a game and I intended to win. The next morning I woke up early, careful not to disturb her. She was still in bed, her arm draped lazily across the pillow, her face peaceful. How ironic, I thought, that she could sleep so soundly while I was drowning in the chaos she'd created. In the kitchen, I brewed a pot of coffee, my mind racing with possibilities. If I wanted this to work, I needed to think a few steps ahead. It wasn't enough to expose her affair, I wanted her to feel the same betrayal she'd inflicted on me. And I wanted to ensure that when the dust settled, I wouldn't just be standing tall, I'd be untouchable. Step 1 was gathering every piece of evidence I could. The investigator's photos were a start, but I needed more. Over the next week, I kept my facade firmly in place. I laughed at Karen's jokes, complimented her cooking, and even suggested a date night to keep her unsuspecting. Meanwhile, I combed through her life with surgical precision. I started with her finances. Karen and I had separate accounts, but we'd always been transparent about money, or so I thought. Logging into our shared credit card statement, I found charges that made my blood boil. Dinners at expensive restaurants I'd never heard of, payments to boutique hotels, even a jewelry purchase that definitely hadn't ended up in my hands. Each transaction was a breadcrumb leading me closer to the truth. I saved copies of everything, organizing them into a neat digital folder labeled House Repairs. It was petty, but the name made me smirk every time I saw it. Next, I went back to her phone. I'd installed monitoring software on her device after the first discovery, something I hated myself for but couldn't regret. The messages between her and S grew more frequent, more brazen. They made plans to meet again, their words dripping with excitement and secrecy. "I can't wait to see you," he'd texted her the day before their last rendezvous. "Me too," she'd replied. "It's so hard to leave him, but I'm counting down the days until I don't have to." That one hit like a punch to the gut. She wasn't just cheating, she was planning to leave me. I stared at the screen, my grip tightening on the phone until my knuckles turned white. But the pain only fueled my determination. Step 2 was setting the stage. If Karen wanted to leave me, I'd make it easy for her, or so she'd think. I began quietly shifting assets into accounts under my name. I consulted with a lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Rebecca who didn't sugarcoat the situation. "You're smart to prepare," she said during our first meeting. "Once she realizes things could get ugly. Protect yourself now." Rebecca helped me draw up paperwork that would ensure Karen couldn't blindside me. I'd kept the house in my name when we married, and Rebecca assured me that I'd retain full ownership. Still, I made sure to secure every financial advantage I could, just in case. Step 3 was playing the long game. Revenge wasn't just about catching her, it was about making her understand the depth of her betrayal. I wanted her to feel the loss, the humiliation, the regret. And I wanted her to see that I'd come out of this stronger. The perfect opportunity came 2 weeks later, when Karen suggested we host a dinner party. "Just a small gathering," she said, her smile bright and cheerful. "It's been so long since we've had everyone over." I agreed, hiding my amusement. A dinner party meant friends, laughter, and pictures of our happy life together, a stage where I could plant the seeds of her downfall. As the day approached, I went out of my way to be the perfect husband. I helped her clean the house, picked out wine, and even offered to cook the main course. Karen seemed delighted, her mood brighter than it had been in months. The night of the party, I played my role to perfection. I welcomed our guests with a grin, poured drinks, and told stories that had everyone laughing. Karen was in her element, flitting between conversations like the social butterfly she'd always been. Watching her, you'd never guess she was hiding a secret that could destroy everything. But I wasn't the only one playing a part. My investigator had sent me information about a man named Scott who worked at a real estate firm across town. I'd memorized his face from the photos, his smug expression burned into my memory. As luck would have it, Scott was on Facebook. His profile was public enough for me to see his smiling pictures, his vacation snapshots, and, most importantly, the mutual friends we shared. It didn't take much to figure out he was connected to one of Karen's friends, a woman named Amanda who happened to be at our dinner party that night. "Amanda," I said casually as we chatted in the kitchen, "you work in real estate, right?" She nodded, sipping her wine. "Yeah, for about 5 years now." "Why?" "Just curious. Do you know a guy named Scott?" "I think he's with one of the firms downtown." Amanda's face lit up. "Oh yeah. Scott and I worked together on a project last year. Great guy, super charming." I smiled, my teeth gritted behind the facade. "Yeah, he seems like it." Amanda didn't notice the edge in my voice, too caught up in recounting a story about Scott's infamous sense of humor. I nodded along, my mind racing with ideas. By the time the party ended, I had a plan, a way to bring Scott into the spotlight without tipping my hand. Karen had no idea what was coming, but soon her carefully constructed world would start to unravel. As I cleaned up the remnants of the evening, Karen wrapped her arms around me, her breath warm against my neck. "Thank you for tonight," she said softly. "It was perfect." I nodded, smiling down at her. "Anything for you?" The words tasted bitter, but I meant them. Anything for her, because soon she'd get exactly what she deserved. I could feel the pieces coming together. Every photo, every text, every careful step, it was all part of a plan I was weaving, one that Karen wouldn't see until it was too late. The dinner party had been a success not because of the laughter and wine, but because it gave me something invaluable. Amanda. Amanda was my key to Scott. I didn't need her to know what she was doing, I just needed her to open the door. Over the next few days, I made subtle moves to ensure I stayed in her orbit. It started small, a text thanking her for helping clean up, an invite to grab coffee under the guise of discussing a charity Karen was supposedly interested in. Amanda was easy to talk to, warm and open, the kind of person who shared without thinking twice. "Oh, Scott? He's hilarious," she said one afternoon, scrolling through her phone to show me a photo of him at a company event. "Everybody loves him." "Why, do you know him?" "Not personally," I lied, taking a mental snapshot of his face. "I've just heard his name come up. Sounds like a great guy." Amanda smiled, oblivious to the calculation behind my words. She didn't realize that every detail she offered, his habits, his favorite bars, even the way he joked about hating early meetings, was ammunition. Once I knew enough about Scott, I took the next step, confronting him but not directly. That would come later. For now, I wanted him to squirm, to feel the same paranoia that had plagued me for weeks. One evening, I parked outside the real estate firm where Scott worked. It was late, the building nearly empty except for a few scattered lights. I waited, watching as employees trickled out one by one. When Scott finally appeared, I stayed back, studying him from a distance. He was exactly as I imagined. Tall, confident, with the kind of easy charm that probably made people trust him without question. I didn't approach him that night. Instead, I followed him, keeping my car far enough behind his to avoid suspicion. He drove to a bar downtown, a trendy spot packed with young professionals unwinding after work. I watched as he greeted a few friends, laughing and clapping a guy on the shoulder. He had no idea I was there, no idea the man sitting in a parked car outside knew every detail of his affair with Karen. Before leaving, I snapped a photo of him through the window, his head thrown back in laughter. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind him later that someone had been watching. The following week, I took the next step. Karen was leaving for another work trip, and I let her go without a word. I even kissed her goodbye, pretending to believe the lies spilling from her lips. As soon as she was gone, I called the private investigator. "She's heading to meet him again," I said, my voice calm despite the storm brewing inside me. The investigator confirmed my suspicions a few hours later. Karen and Scott had checked into another boutique hotel, this one farther out of town. I told him to keep documenting everything: photos, timestamps, receipts. I wanted an airtight case. But this time I wasn't content to just wait. I drove to the hotel myself, parking in a lot across the street. Through the large lobby windows I saw them together, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. Watching them stung, but it also steeled my resolve. I wasn't just going to expose them, I was going to make sure they regretted every single moment they'd stolen from me. The first crack in their facade came the next day. I'd found Scott's personal email through some careful digging, and I sent him a message that I knew would rattle him. Subject: does your wife know? Message: you've been busy. I wonder how she'd feel about your work trips. Let's talk. I didn't sign the email or include any identifying details, but I attached one of the photos the investigator had taken. Scott and Karen walking arm in arm into the hotel. I imagined his face when he saw it, the panic setting in as he realized someone knew his secret. I didn't expect a reply and I didn't get one, but that wasn't the point. I didn't want Scott to answer. I wanted him to sweat. Karen came home the next day, all smiles as if she hadn't spent the weekend betraying me. She kissed me on the cheek and asked about my plans for the week. I played my part, keeping my anger buried beneath a mask of indifference. You've been so busy lately, I said casually over dinner. We should plan a getaway soon. Just the two of us. Her eyes lit up, and I wondered if it was relief or guilt that made her so eager. That sounds amazing. Maybe next month? Next month sounds perfect, I replied, already knowing the trip would never happen. The real test came a few days later when I decided to push Scott further. This time I left a note on his car. It was simple, just a folded piece of paper tucked under his windshield wiper. Inside I'd written, I know about Karen. So does my lawyer. Watch your back. I stayed nearby, watching from a coffee shop as Scott walked to his car. He stopped short when he saw the note, his face going pale as he read it. For a moment he looked around, his eyes scanning the parking lot as if he could spot the person responsible. I sipped my coffee, watching him from behind the window. He was nervous. Good. That's exactly how I wanted him. The next day Karen started acting strange. She was jumpy, her phone clutched tightly in her hand as if she was afraid to set it down. I caught her staring at me more than once, her brow furrowed like she was trying to read my mind. Is everything okay? I asked, feigning concern. Yeah, she said quickly, forcing a smile. Just tired? I nodded, hiding my satisfaction. Scott must have told her about the note, but she didn't dare bring it up. She was afraid that I knew, afraid of what I might do. She was right to be afraid. The stage was set. Karen and Scott thought they were in control, but they had no idea the web was tightening around them. I wasn't just going to confront them, I was going to burn their perfect little world to the ground. And when the fire started, I'd be the only one left standing. The time had come to pull the trigger. Every lie Karen had told, every secret she thought was safe, it was all coming to light. I didn't just want to end this quietly. No, I wanted her to feel the weight of everything she'd done. I woke up that morning with a strange calm. Karen was already up, humming in the kitchen as she made breakfast. She acted like nothing had changed, like we were still the perfect couple everyone thought we were. But today that mask was going to crack. As she poured herself a cup of coffee, I watched her, memorizing the way she moved, the way she smiled absently to herself. It made me wonder if she'd smiled like that for him. My jaw clenched, but I forced myself to stay composed. Big plans today? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She glanced over her shoulder, her hair falling perfectly across her face. Just errands. What about you? Actually, I'm taking the day off, I said, sipping my coffee. Thought I'd get some things done around the house. Her smile faltered for just a second, so brief I almost missed it. That's nice, she said, turning back to the sink. She didn't ask what things I was planning to get done. That afternoon I made my move. The private investigator had delivered his final report the day before. Photos, time-stamped messages, and a neat little dossier that painted a damning picture of Karen and Scott's affair. It was everything I needed, not just to confront her, but to destroy the narrative she'd been spinning behind my back. I called Amanda first. She picked up after the second ring, her voice cheerful as always. Hey Amanda. Quick question for you, I said, keeping my tone light. Are you free tonight? Karen and I were thinking of having a few people over. Oh, that sounds great. What's the occasion? No occasion. Just thought it'd be nice to catch up with everyone. Amanda agreed, and within the hour I'd invited a small circle of friends, including a few who knew Scott. Karen was oblivious, texting me from the grocery store to ask if we needed more wine. By the time Karen got home, the stage was set. She walked through the door with bags of groceries, her usual radiant smile plastered across her face. "What's all this?" she asked, gesturing to the living room where I'd arranged seating for our guests. "Just a little get-together," I said, taking the bags from her hands. "I thought we could use some company." She looked surprised but didn't question it. Maybe she thought I was trying to rekindle the spark between us. I almost laughed at the thought. The guests arrived at 7 o'clock sharp. Karen flitted around the room, greeting everyone with hugs and compliments. She was in her element, playing the role of the perfect hostess. I watched her closely, waiting for the moment her world would come crashing down. Amanda was the first to mention Scott. "Too bad Scott couldn't make it," she said casually, pouring herself a drink. Karen froze for half a second before recovering, her laugh too bright. "Yeah, he's probably busy. Work's been crazy for everyone, right?" Amanda nodded, oblivious to the tension that had suddenly filled the room. At 8:30 I made my move. I stood up, tapping my glass to get everyone's attention. "Thanks for coming tonight," I said, smiling at the group. "It's been too long since we all got together." Karen beamed at me from across the room, and for a split second I felt a pang of something. Love? Sadness? I wasn't sure. But it didn't stop me. "I actually have a surprise for everyone," I continued, pulling my laptop from the side table. "Karen and I have been working on something, and I think it's time to share it." Karen's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing slightly as I connected the laptop to the TV. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "You'll see," I said, keeping my tone calm. The screen flickered to life, and the first image appeared, Karen and Scott walking into a hotel together. The room fell silent. What is this?" Karen stammered, her face pale. I didn't answer. Instead, I clicked to the next image, Scott leaning in to kiss her, their hands intertwined. Gasps filled the room. "Andrew, stop," Karen whispered, her voice shaking. "Why?" I asked, turning to face her. "Isn't this what you wanted? To leave me for him?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "It's not what it looks like." "Don't insult me, Karen," I snapped, my voice sharp enough to cut through her excuses. I turned back to the room, addressing the stunned faces of our friends. "Karen's been having an affair. While I've been here building a life with her, she's been sneaking off with this guy." Amanda's face turned red as realization dawned. "Scott? You mean Scott?" Karen didn't answer. She was too busy crumbling under the weight of the truth. The night ended in chaos. Guests left quickly, some offering me quiet condolences, others avoiding eye contact altogether. Karen tried to plead with me after they were gone, her words tumbling over each other in desperation. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." I looked at her, the woman I'd loved for 10 years, and felt nothing but cold anger. "You didn't mean for me to find out," I said. "That's the only thing you regret." By the next morning, Karen was gone. I didn't know where she went, and I didn't care. The house was quiet for the first time in weeks, and for once I didn't feel the weight of her lies pressing down on me. It wasn't over yet, there were still legal matters to sort out, and I knew Scott wouldn't let this go without a fight. But in that moment I felt a sense of peace. Karen had thought she could build a life on lies, but I'd made sure the truth would always catch up with her. And now it was her turn to live with the consequences.